The year is 1870, and you've just awakened in the most unforgiving place on Earth, the American frontier. Tonight, we journey together into a world where every sunrise might be your last, where civilization is just a word people whisper in their prayers, and where survival depends on luck, violence, and a willingness to do whatever it takes. Before we begin this descent into the dust and desperation of frontier life, take a moment to like this video if you find value in these historical journeys, and subscribe to Bedtime History for more stories that transport you to times and places that shaped our world. Your support helps us continue exploring the darker corners of human experience. Now, settle back, dim the lights, and let the sounds of the frontier wash over you. The creaking of wagon wheels, the distant howl of coyotes, and the ever-present whisper of wind across endless plains. Tonight, you're not safe in your modern bed. You're lying on a straw mattress in a world that wants you dead, and you have 24 hours to prove you deserve to live. Chapter 1. Hell on Earth. You open your eyes to the sound of gunshots echoing across the dawn, horses whinnying in terror, and someone screaming about claim jumpers down a gulch. The acrid smell of gunpowder drifts through the thin walls of your shelter, mixing with the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting meat, and human waste that defines every frontier settlement. Your bed is a straw mattress that crinkles like autumn leaves with every movement, stuffed with whatever dried grass could be found, and probably home to more insects than a summer meadow. The straw pokes through the thin canvas covering, jabbing into your spine and ribs throughout the night. Beneath you, the floor is rough-hewn planks with gaps wide enough for snakes to slither through, or dirt-packed so hard it feels like stone beneath your aching bones. The walls around you are made of logs hastily cut and fitted together, chinked with mud that's already cracking and falling away in chunks. Through these gaps, you can see daylight, feel the wind, and watch the occasional scorpion or tarantula make its way inside seeking warmth. There are no windows, just holes cut into the walls and covered with oiled paper that tears at the first strong wind, leaving you exposed to the elements and anything else that might want to visit. Your door isn't really a door at all, just a blanket hung on a rope, offering about as much security as a polite suggestion. Anyone who wants inside can simply push the fabric aside and step into your world, whether you invite them or not. Privacy is a concept that died somewhere back east, buried under the weight of survival and the harsh realities of frontier existence. The air inside your shelter is thick and heavy, tasting of smoke from cooking fires, the metallic tang of blood from recent violence, and the sour smell of fear that clings to everything like morning dew. You breathe it in because you have no choice, feeling it coat your lungs with the essence of desperation and broken dreams. Outside, the world is already alive with danger. Roosters crow from their perches atop chicken coops that serve as much to attract predators as to house birds. Dogs bark incessantly, not from joy, but from the constant state of alert that keeps them alive in a place where relaxation means death. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the sound of digging, someone scratching at the hard earth in search of gold, or perhaps preparing a grave for yesterday's casualty. The morning light filters through your inadequate walls, casting strange shadows that dance and shift with every movement of sun. These shadows hide dangers you can't see but can feel watching you, waiting for the moment when you let your guard down or make the wrong choice. Every dark corner could conceal a rattlesnake coiled and ready to strike, a spider with venom that will kill you slowly and painfully, or simply empty space that will fill with your blood if you're not careful. Your possessions are few and precious, each one representing a choice between survival and comfort. A tin cup dented from use and blackened by countless campfires. A knife with a handle worn smooth by desperate hands, its blade nicked from cutting everything from rope to flesh. Maybe a gun if you're lucky, though ammunition is expensive and every bullet must count. A change of clothes if you're wealthy, though wealth is measured differently here than anywhere else you've ever known. The sounds outside your shelter tell the story of another day beginning in this godforsaken place. Wagon wheels creak as supply trains prepare to make their dangerous journey between settlements, their drivers already drinking whiskey to steady their nerves for the ordeal ahead. Men shout orders in languages you recognize and others you don't, creating a babble of desperation that echoes off the empty hills. Horses stamp and snort, sensing the tension that permeates everything here like smoke from a fire that never quite goes out. These animals know what you're still learning, that this place demands constant vigilance, and that a moment's carelessness can mean the difference between seeing another sunset and becoming food for the vultures that circle overhead with infinite patience. You lie still for a moment longer, listening to the symphony of survival playing outside your walls. The distant crack of a whip as someone drives their animals harder than they should. The scrape of metal on stone as tools are sharpened for another day of backbreaking labor. The soft thud of earth being moved, whether for construction, burial, or the endless search for precious metals that draws people to this wasteland like moths to a flame. This is your world now, a place where the sun rises on fresh corpses and sets on new graves, where the strong prey on the weak and the weak prey on anyone weaker still, where justice comes from the barrel of a gun and mercy is a luxury that few can afford, where every breath might be your last and every heartbeat is borrowed time. The frontier has awakened, and with it, all the dangers that daylight brings. Wild animals emerge from their dens hungry and aggressive. Desperate men begin their daily search for opportunities to survive, whether through honest work or violence. The elements prepare their daily assault on everything that dares to exist in this harsh landscape. You are no longer safe in sleep's embrace. The day has claimed you, and now you must prove that you deserve to see another sunset in a world that has already decided you probably don't. Chapter 2. Wake Up and Die. The first challenge of your frontier morning isn't finding coffee or washing your face. It's simply not dying in the first 60 seconds of consciousness. You swing your legs over the side of your makeshift bed, and immediately 3 separate threats materialize as if summoned by your movement. A rattlesnake lies coiled beside your water barrel, drawn by the warmth radiating from the wooden staves in the cool morning air. Its diamond-patterned scales catch the early light filtering through your paper window, and the sound it makes is soft, almost gentle, like dried beans shaking in a gourd. This sound means death arrives in approximately 2 seconds if you move wrong, speak too loudly, or simply have the misfortune of existing in a way that displeases 6 feet of muscle and venom. On the water barrel itself, a tarantula the size of a man's palm spreads its legs wide, each one thick as a pencil and covered in hair that glistens with morning moisture. Its 8 eyes reflect the light like tiny black mirrors, and though its bite won't kill you quickly, the hours of agony that follow will make you wish it had. The spider doesn't move, doesn't acknowledge your presence, but you know it's aware of everything, every breath, every heartbeat, every slight tremor of fear that runs through your body. Through the gaps in your wall, you hear the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked, the metallic click of death being prepared by human hands. Someone outside has spotted movement in your shelter and drawn the obvious conclusion that you might be a claim jumper, a horse thief, or simply someone worth robbing. In the frontier, paranoia isn't a mental illness, it's a survival skill, and shooting first while asking questions later has saved more lives than it's cost. You remain perfectly still, calculating distances and odds with the cold precision that this place demands. The snake is closest, maybe 3 feet away, close enough to strike before you can react, but far enough that sudden movement might startle it into retreat. The spider is motionless but unpredictable, capable of moving faster than your eye can follow. The person outside with the rifle is the greatest immediate threat, but also the most rational, the only one you might be able to reason with if you can make them understand you're not a danger. Moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understands that haste leads to death, you slowly raise your hands where they can be seen through the gaps in your walls. Your voice, when you speak, is barely above a whisper, loud enough to be heard but not so loud as to startle the creatures that share your morning. Just getting up, you call softly to whoever holds the rifle outside. No trouble here. The response comes as a grunt that could mean anything from acceptance to the sound someone makes before pulling a trigger. You wait, listening to your own heartbeat and the soft whisper of the rattlesnake scales against the wooden barrel as it shifts position slightly. The spider remains motionless, a hairy statue of potential death perched above the water you'll need to drink to survive the day. Minutes pass like hours before you hear the sound of the rifle being uncocked and footsteps moving away through the dust. The immediate human threat has passed, but the animal dangers remain, patient and eternal as the landscape itself. You begin the delicate process of extracting yourself from this situation without triggering the death that waits mere feet away. Your first need is water, but the barrel is guarded by creatures that don't negotiate. Using movements so slow they're barely perceptible, you reach for the long stick you keep beside your bed for exactly this purpose. Every frontier dweller learns to live with the constant presence of things that bite, sting, and kill, developing rituals and tools for the simple act of staying alive through ordinary moments. The stick, a piece of pine worn smooth by your hands, becomes an extension of your will as you use it to gently encourage the tarantula to relocate. The spider moves reluctantly, its legs finding purchase on the stick as it climbs away from the water barrel with the measured dignity of something that knows it's deadly and doesn't need to prove it. You guide it toward the wall where it disappears through one of the gaps, returning to whatever dark place it calls home. The rattlesnake requires different tactics. Sound and vibration are its primary senses, so you begin a slow, rhythmic tapping with your stick against the wooden floor. The snake's head turns toward the sound, tongue flicking out to taste the air for information about this new development. Gradually, you increase the frequency of the tapping while moving the stick in a wide arc, creating a sound trail that leads away from both you and the water barrel. Like a deadly dancer responding to music only it can hear, the snake begins to follow the rhythm you've created, its body flowing across the rough floor with liquid grace. You guide it toward the doorway, maintaining the hypnotic pattern until it slides beneath your blanket door and disappears into the morning light, where it will become someone else's problem. Only then can you approach the water barrel, though even this simple act carries risk. The water inside has been sitting for days, accumulating dust, insects, and a microscopic death that frontier dwellers simply accept as par drinking. You use a piece of cloth to strain out the visible debris, but bacteria and disease remain invisible passengers in every drop you swallow. The water tastes of wood and rust, with undertones of something organic that you try not to identify. It's warm from sitting in the sun, and algae gives it a slightly green tint that speaks of biological processes you'd rather not contemplate. But dehydration will kill you faster than contaminated water, so you drink deeply, feeling the liquid coat your throat and settle into your stomach where it will either nourish you or begin the slow process of killing you from within. Your next need is to relieve yourself, a process that in civilized places happens in private spaces designed for the purpose. Here, you step outside your shelter into the growing daylight, where privacy is whatever distance you can put between yourself and the nearest human observer. Behind your cabin, you squat in the dust and sage, vulnerable to everything that hunts in the early morning hours. The ground beneath you is hard-packed earth mixed with the waste of everyone who has used this spot before you. There's no toilet paper, no soft leaves, just the harsh reality of frontier hygiene that strips away every pretense of the civilization you once knew. You use whatever's available, your shirt tail, a handful of grass, or simply endure the discomfort that comes with living like an animal in a place that reduces humans to their most basic needs. While you're in this vulnerable position, your ears strain for any sound that might indicate approaching danger. The soft pad of animal feet moving through brush. The clink of metal that might indicate someone approaching with weapons. The whisper of wind through grass that could mask the approach of hostile humans or hungry predators. When you're finished, you return to your shelter to face the next challenge of frontier morning, finding something to eat that won't kill you before nightfall. Your breakfast consists of whatever you managed to preserve from yesterday's foraging or hunting, assuming you were successful and assuming it hasn't spoiled overnight in the heat. The morning routine that once seemed simple and automatic has become a complex dance with death, where every ordinary action carries extraordinary risk. You survived the first hour of your frontier day, but 23 more stretch ahead, each bringing new opportunities for the world to remind you that you don't belong here and weren't meant to survive. Chapter 3: The Lawless Land. The concept of law and order that you knew in civilized places died somewhere east of the Mississippi River, buried under the weight of distance, desperation, and the simple reality that authority means nothing when the nearest federal marshal is 300 miles away through hostile territory. Justice in this place doesn't wear a blindfold or carry balance scales. It carries a gun, rides a horse, and makes decisions based on who's fastest on the draw and who has the most friends willing to shoot in their defense. The law is whatever the strongest man in town says it is, and that designation can change multiple times in a single day depending on who's been killed and who's doing the killing. In settlements large enough to warrant the title, a sheriff might pin a tin star to his vest and claim authority over the chaos that surrounds him. But this badge represents hope more than power, a symbol of the civilization that people remember rather than the reality they inhabit. Most sheriffs are reformed outlaws themselves, men who decided that being on the side of what passes for law offers better survival odds than running from it. The current sheriff of the nearest town acquired his position by being the last man standing after a dispute over cattle rustling turned into a 3-day gunfight that left 7 men dead and the previous lawman face down in the street. His qualifications for the job include an ability to stay sober long enough to aim straight and a reputation violent enough to make most troublemakers think twice before testing his authority. But his authority extends only as far as his bullets can reach, and beyond the town limits, the frontier operates under different rules entirely. Out here, among the scattered claims and isolated homesteads, law enforcement consists of whatever individuals can impose through force of arms and strength of will. If someone steals your horse, you track them down and take it back, assuming you can find them before they disappear into the vast emptiness that swallows people without trace or explanation. The nearest federal court sits 200 miles south in a town you've never seen, presided over by a judge who may or may not still be alive, depending on how recent Indian raids and outlaw activities have affected the region. Federal marshals exist in theory, but they're spread so thin across such vast territory that encountering one is like seeing a shooting star, remarkable precisely because it's so rare. Most disputes are settled through what people euphemistically call frontier justice, which is really just mob rule dressed up with the pretense of legal proceeding. If someone is accused of horse theft, the nearest group of armed men constitutes themselves as judge and jury, holding court in a local saloon with whiskey serving as both evidence and legal counsel. Trials, when they occur at all, follow procedures that would make civilized lawyers weep. Evidence consists of whoever can tell the most convincing story, preferably while sober enough to stand upright. Witnesses are whoever happened to be present and hasn't been shot yet. The jury is composed of whoever has time to listen and strong enough opinions to voice them loudly. Defense attorneys don't exist because the concept of legal representation has no meaning in a place where might makes right and survival depends on personal violence rather than legal arguments. If you're accused of a crime, your defense is whatever story you can tell and whatever weapons you can draw before the crowd decide you're guilty. Verdicts are reached through a combination of popular opinion, personal grudges, and whoever's buying the next round of drinks. Guilt or innocence matters less than whether the accused has friends willing to fight for him or enemies eager to see him hang. Justice becomes a popularity contest where the stakes are measured in lives rather than votes. Punishments are swift and final because nobody has time for appeals or lengthy imprisonment. Horse thieves hang because horses represent survival and stealing one is tantamount to murder. Claim jumpers get shot because mining claims represent everything a man owns and hopes to own. Card cheats die because gambling is the only entertainment available and cheating violates the one sacred trust that holds communities together. Hanging is the preferred method of execution because it requires no special equipment beyond a rope and a sturdy tree branch. The condemned man stands on a horse or wagon while the noose is fitted around his neck. Then the support is removed and gravity completes the sentence. It's efficient, public, and sends a clear message to anyone else considering similar crimes. But even hangings can go wrong in spectacular and horrifying ways. If the drop is too short, the victim strangles slowly, kicking and choking while the crowd watches. If it's too long, the head's separate from the body in a shower of blood that traumatizes spectators and ruins everyone's appetite for the rest of the day. Amateur executioners learn through trial and error, with the emphasis on error. Vigilante committees form spontaneously whenever crime exceeds the community's tolerance for chaos, which happens with disturbing regularity. These groups of armed citizens take it upon themselves to identify, capture, and punish wrongdoers according to their own interpretation of frontier justice. Sometimes they target actual criminals, sometimes they settle personal scores, and sometimes they simply eliminate people they find inconvenient or threatening. The line between vigilante and terrorist is impossibly thin, often crossed without anyone noticing until bodies start accumulating and fear replaces whatever security the vigilantes were supposed to provide. What begins as community self-defense often evolves into organized persecution of anyone who doesn't conform to the vigilante's vision of proper behavior. Women accused of prostitution, men suspected of being homosexual, immigrants who speak the wrong language, and anyone whose skin color marks them as different can find themselves targeted by vigilante justice that has nothing to do with actual crimes and everything to do with fear, prejudice, and the human tendency to blame outsiders for problems that have no easy solutions. In this environment, survival depends not on following laws, but on understanding the unwritten rules that govern human interaction when civilization's constraints have been stripped away. Respect is earned through strength, maintained through vigilance, and lost through any sign of weakness that invites predation. Honor becomes a luxury that few can afford, and mercy is often seen as invitation for further violence. The frontier doesn't just lack law enforcement, it actively resists it. Order imposed from outside threatens the independence that draws people to this harsh place, while order imposed from within threatens whoever currently benefits from chaos. So the cycle continues, violence begetting violence in an endless spiral that consumes the weak and hardens the survivors until they're barely recognizable as the civilized people they once were. Chapter 4. Death by 1,000 Cuts. Disease stalks the frontier like a patient predator, invisible and inescapable, claiming more lives than all the gunfights, Indian raids, and wild animal attacks combined. In this place where medical knowledge consists of folk remedies and desperate guesses, Getting sick isn't just unfortunate. It's usually a death sentence written in fever and delirium. The nearest thing to a doctor might be a man who apprenticed with a physician back east before fleeing some scandal or personal catastrophe that drove him to the frontier. More likely, he's someone who read a medical book once, performed surgery on wounded soldiers during the war, or simply designated himself a healer because someone needed to try, and because trying beats watching people die without any attempt at intervention. Dr. Jensen, if that's really his name, operates out of a room above the saloon where the smell of whiskey mingles with the stench of infected wounds and the metallic tang of blood that never quite washes out of the rough wooden floors. His medical bag contains instruments that would make a medieval torturer proud. Tools designed more for carpentry than surgery, but adapted for human use through necessity and desperation. His scalpels are kitchen knives honed to razor sharpness on whetstones meant for farm tools. His forceps are blacksmith's pliers cleaned with whiskey and prayer. His bone saw is exactly what it sounds like, a carpenter's tool that cuts through human bone with the same efficiency it cuts through lumber, assuming the patient doesn't die from shock before the procedure is complete. Anesthesia exists only in the form of whiskey and laudanum, both administered in quantities that often prove more dangerous than the conditions they're meant to treat. Patients bite down on leather straps or wooden dowels while Dr. Jensen works, their screams echoing through the building and out into the street where passers-by quicken their pace to avoid being reminded of their own mortality. Antiseptics are limited to whatever alcohol can be spared from drinking, plus vinegar, salt water, and carbolic acid when it's available, which isn't often. Sterilization consists of wiping instruments on whatever cloth is handy, usually Dr. Jensen's pants or a bar rag that's seen more alcohol than most of his patients. The concept of bacterial infection exists in medical textbooks that never made it west of civilization. Surgery is performed on kitchen tables, bar tops, or whatever flat surface can be cleared of debris and blood from previous patients. Lighting comes from oil lamps that cast dancing shadows and fill the air with smoke that burns the eyes and obscures the surgical field. Dr. Jensen squints through the gloom, guided more by feel than sight as he probes wounds with fingers that haven't been properly cleaned since the last time he remembered to wash them. Common diseases tear through frontier communities like wildfire through dry grass, leaving trails of corpses that overwhelm burial details and fill makeshift cemeteries with unmarked graves. Cholera arrives without warning, turning healthy adults into dehydrated corpses within hours as violent diarrhea and vomiting strip the body of every drop of fluid it contains. Victims die in agony, cramped and convulsing as their bodies literally dry up from the inside out. Typhoid fever burns through victims for weeks, cooking their brains with sustained high temperatures that cause delirium, hallucinations, and eventual death. Those afflicted babble in tongues, seeing things that aren't there while their bodies waste away despite the fever that consumes them. Family members watch helplessly as loved ones disappear into madness before finally succumbing to the disease that hollows them out like carved pumpkins. Smallpox covers victims with pustules that burst and reform, turning human skin into landscapes of corruption that weep pus and blood until the patient resembles something from a nightmare rather than a person. The lucky ones die quickly from secondary infections. The unlucky survive with faces and bodies scarred beyond recognition, marked forever as survivors of something that should have killed them. Dysentery turns intestines into open sewers, causing bloody diarrhea that weakens victims until they can't stand, can't eat, and can't do anything but wait for death to arrive with relief from the constant cramping and pain. Whole settlements empty out as people flee the disease, abandoning homes and possessions to escape something they can't fight and don't understand. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, slowly devours lungs from the inside, causing victims to cough up blood and tissue while growing thinner and weaker with each passing day. The disease can take months or years to kill, during which victims spread infection to everyone around them through blood-flecked coughs and labored breathing that fills the air with bacteria. Treatment for these conditions ranges from useless to actively harmful. Bloodletting with leeches or lancets weakens patients who are already fighting for their lives. Mercury, administered for everything from syphilis to melancholy, slowly poisons victims with heavy metal toxicity that causes tremors, dementia, and death. Opium-based medications create addicts out of patients seeking relief from pain, trading one form of suffering for another. Surgical procedures that should take minutes stretch into hours as Dr. Jensen works by lamplight with tools that barely qualify as medical instruments. Amputations are common because infection spreads faster than it can be treated, turning minor wounds into life-threatening conditions that require cutting away diseased flesh and bone before gangrene claims the entire limb. Broken bones are set by feel and hope, with no way to see internal injuries or ensure proper alignment. Splints are made from whatever wood is available, padded with rags and secured with rope that cuts off circulation and causes more damage than it prevents. Many patients end up with limbs that heal crooked, leaving them permanently disabled in a place where physical capacity means survival. Childbirth is particularly deadly for women on the frontier, where complications that could be easily treated in civilized places become death sentences for both mother and child. Dr. Jensen has delivered babies using forceps designed for pulling nails in rooms lit by candles that drip wax on sterile fields that were never sterile to begin with. Infection following childbirth kills women slowly and painfully as their bodies fight losing battles against bacteria introduced during delivery by unclean hands and instruments. Many women die days or weeks after successful births, their systems overwhelmed by infections that turn minor tears into fatal wounds. The psychological toll of frontier medicine affects both patients and practitioners, creating a culture where pain is expected, suffering is normal, and death is always close enough to touch. Dr. Jensen drinks heavily between patients, not from callousness, but from the accumulated weight of watching people die despite his best efforts to save them. In this environment, staying healthy becomes a matter of luck more than planning, where a simple cut can become a death sentence and a common cold can develop into pneumonia that kills within days. The frontier doesn't just test your ability to survive violence and hardship, it challenges your body's capacity to resist the 1,000 small deaths that nibble away at life until nothing remains but memories and unmarked graves. Chapter 5: Hunger Games. Food in this wasteland isn't about taste or nutrition. It's about postponing starvation long enough to see another sunrise. Your stomach gnaws at itself with a persistent ache of emptiness while your body slowly consumes its own muscle tissue to survive. Fresh, anything exists only in memory, a luxury from a world that feels as distant as the moon hanging over the endless prairie. The barrel in the corner of your shelter contains hardtack, those concrete-like biscuits that require soaking in coffee or water just to become chewable. Each piece resembles a flat stone more than bread, baked until all moisture has been driven out and replaced with the hard certainty of survival. When you bite down, the sound echoes through your skull like breaking rocks, and your jaw aches from the effort of reducing these edible bricks to something your throat can manage. Inside each piece of hardtack, live tiny white worms, weevils that have made themselves at home in your food supply. At first, the sight of writhing larvae turns your stomach and makes you gag, but hunger teaches harsh lessons about pride and preference. The protein these insects provide might be the difference between living and dying, so you learn to close your eyes and crunch through their soft bodies, tasting the bitter essence of survival with each bite. Your coffee isn't really coffee at all, but grounds that have been used and reused until they're little more than brown water flavored with memory. The bitter liquid burns your throat, going down and settles in your stomach like warm mud. But caffeine is caffeine, and the ritual of drinking something hot provides psychological comfort that your body desperately needs. Salt pork sits in its barrel, preserved in brine so concentrated it could cure leather. Each piece is white with crystallized salt that burns your mouth and makes your lips crack from dehydration. The meat itself has the texture of shoe leather and tastes like the ocean distilled into something barely edible. But fat is energy, and energy is life. So you force it down and chase it with precious water that you can't spare but can't survive without. Beans, when you're lucky enough to have them, require hours of cooking over fires that consume what you can't afford to burn. They bubble in iron pots that rust and taint everything with the taste of metal and time. Sometimes the beans are infested with insects that float to the surface during cooking, black specks that you skim away if you're feeling particular or leave in if you're feeling practical. Jerky hangs from the rafters of your shelter, strips of meat dried until they resemble brown leather. It might have been beef once, or buffalo, or elk, though the taste has been so transformed by salt and time that its origins remain a mystery. Chewing jerky is like trying to eat rawhide, requiring patience and strong teeth to reduce each piece to something your stomach can process. Fresh vegetables exist only in the gardens of the most established settlements, and then only if the season is right, the rains have come, and raiders haven't destroyed the crops out of spite or hunger. Most people go months without seeing anything green that isn't mold growing on forgotten food. Scurvy follows malnutrition like a shadow, loosening teeth and opening old wounds as your body forgets how to heal itself. Hunting provides fresh meat for those skilled enough to track game and lucky enough to avoid being tracked themselves. But ammunition is precious. Noise attracts unwanted attention, and spending hours away from your shelter means returning to find it stripped bare by opportunistic thieves or burned to the ground by enemies you didn't know you had. Game animals aren't the fat, domesticated creatures of civilization, but lean, wary beasts that have survived in this harsh landscape by being faster, smarter, and more paranoid than their predators. Deer bound away at the first scent of human presence. Rabbits disappear into burrows faster than eyes can follow. Even when you're successful, field dressing requires skill that city dwellers never learned, and spoilage begins the moment the animal dies. Fish exist in some streams, but many waterways run poisoned with runoff from mining operations upstream. Mercury and other toxic metals settle into the flesh of anything that lives in contaminated water, turning potential food into slow poison that accumulates in human bodies over time. You might survive today's hunger only to die from tomorrow's toxicity. Trading posts sell food when they have it, but prices fluctuate wildly based on supply, demand, and the trader's assessment of how desperate you appear. A can of peaches might cost a week's wages, assuming you have wages and assuming the trader is willing to accept whatever currency you're offering. Barter becomes more common than money, with ammunition, tools, and information serving as acceptable payment for sustenance. Preservation techniques are primitive and unreliable, requiring constant vigilance to prevent spoilage that can kill as surely as starvation. Meat must be smoked continuously to prevent rot, requiring fires that announce your location to anyone within miles. Salt draws moisture from food, but also attracts animals and humans who want to steal your supplies. Storage containers are whatever you can find or make, often repurposed from other uses and never quite adequate for their new purpose. Flour barrels leak, letting in moisture that ruins entire supplies overnight. Cloth sacks tear, spilling precious grain onto dirty floors where it becomes inedible. Metal containers rust, contaminating contents with iron oxide that turns food bitter and possibly toxic. Cooking requires fuel that's scarce and precious, whether wood, coal, or dried animal dung that burns with acrid smoke and fills your shelter with fumes that make breathing an exercise in endurance. Every meal costs energy that you might not be able to replace, making the simple act of eating a calculation of diminishing returns. Water for cooking must be carefully rationed from supplies that never seem adequate for all the demands placed upon them. Cleaning pots and utensils requires precious liquid that could be used for drinking, creating impossible choices between hygiene and hydration that usually resolve in favor of immediate survival over long-term health. Winter transforms food scarcity from chronic problem to acute crisis, as hunting becomes nearly impossible and stored supplies dwindle toward nothing. Frozen streams cut off water sources while snow makes travel to trading posts impossible for weeks at a time. People die not from cold but from hunger, their bodies consuming themselves from the inside until nothing remains but skin stretched over bones. Your relationship with food becomes primal and desperate, stripped of all the cultural meanings and social rituals that once surrounded eating. Meals aren't shared experiences, but solitary struggles against starvation, consumed quickly and without pleasure, because pleasure is a luxury that hungry people can't afford. Chapter 6: Shelter from the Storm. Your dwelling isn't shelter. It's a collection of materials barely held together by hope and desperation, standing only because the wind hasn't blown hard enough yet to reveal how inadequate human construction becomes when stripped of civilization's resources and knowledge. The logs that form your walls were cut with hand saws by men who learned carpentry through necessity rather than training, creating joints that gap and twist as the wood dries and settles. Green timber was used because seasoned lumber wasn't available, and now every board warps and cracks as moisture evaporates, opening fissures that invite entry from every creature small enough to squeeze through. Chinking between logs consists of mud mixed with whatever binding materials could be found: grass, animal hair, pieces of cloth from worn-out clothes. This primitive mortar crumbles constantly, falling away in chunks that leave gaps wide enough for snakes to enter and small mammals to take up residence in your walls. You spend hours each week replacing fallen chinking, mixing new mud with your hands, and pressing it into cracks that reopen as soon as your back is turned. Your roof, such as it is, consists of wooden shingles split for whatever trees could be found nearby, often pine or cedar that splits unevenly and leaves gaps between pieces. These shingles are held down by their own weight and the hope that wind won't lift them away like autumn leaves. When storms come, you listen to each piece rattling and shifting, calculating which ones will blow away and leave you exposed to the elements. Some homesteaders use sod for roofing, cutting thick rectangles of prairie grass and dirt to layer over wooden frameworks. This creates a roof that leaks mud when it rains, drops insects and small animals when it dries, and occasionally collapses entirely when the weight becomes too much for supporting timbers to bear. Living under a sod roof means accepting that your ceiling will constantly shed debris into your food, your bedding, and your lungs. Windows don't exist in the way civilized people understand them, just holes cut into walls and covered with whatever transparent material could be obtained. Oiled paper tears in the first strong wind, leaving you with openings that let in weather, animals, and anyone who wants to observe your activities. Glass is so precious that even small panes cost more than most people earn in months, making windows a luxury that few can afford. Your door hangs on leather hinges that stretch and sag until the door drags on the floor and refuses to close properly. The leather cracks in dry weather and rotates in wet weather, gradually failing until the door becomes a loose panel that anyone can push aside. Locks don't exist because metal hardware costs too much and skilled metalworkers are rarer than honest politicians. The floor might be wooden planks with gaps between them that serve as convenient disposal for food scraps and waste, Or it might be packed earth that turns to mud when water seeps through the inadequate roof. Either way, the surface beneath your feet harbors insects, rodents, and the accumulated filth of everyone who lived here before you. Heating comes from a stone fireplace built by someone who understood masonry about as well as you understand engineering, which is to say not at all. The chimney draws poorly, filling your dwelling with smoke that burns your eyes and coats everything with a layer of soot that never quite washes off. The fireplace consumes enormous amounts of wood that must be cut, split, and hauled by hand, turning the simple act of staying warm into a full-time occupation. Wood for fuel grows scarce as settlements expand, and trees are cut faster than they can regrow. Dead wood burns quickly and provides little heat, while green wood smolders and produces more smoke than warmth. Coal, when available, burns hotter but costs money that most people don't have and produces toxic fumes that accumulate in poorly ventilated spaces. Lighting after sunset comes from candles made of animal fat that drip continuously and smell like cooking meat, or oil lamps that consume precious fuel and produce dim, flickering light that strains your eyes and casts dancing shadows that hide dangers lurking in corners. Reading becomes impossible, sewing becomes dangerous, and most people simply go to bed when darkness falls because artificial light is too expensive to waste on convenience. Weather in this region isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively hostile to human survival. Summer temperatures climb past 120 degrees in what little shade can be found, turning your shelter into an oven that bakes you slowly while you try to work or sleep. The air shimmers with heat that makes breathing feel like inhaling fire, and metal tools become too hot to touch without burning your skin. Winter brings temperatures that plummet to 40 degrees below zero, accompanied by winds that drive snow through every crack and gap in your inadequate walls. Fires that barely warm the air near the fireplace leave the far corners of your dwelling cold enough to freeze water solid. You wake to find ice coating the inside of your walls, formed from the moisture of your own breathing. Storms arrive without warning and with violence that civilized people never experience. Tornadoes tear across the plains with winds that can lift buildings off their foundations and scatter the pieces across miles of empty grassland. You listen to the approaching roar and hope that the storm will pass nearby rather than directly overhead, because shelter becomes meaningless when faced with nature's full fury. Flash floods turn dry creek beds into torrents that sweep away everything in their path, including buildings, livestock, and people who couldn't reach high ground fast enough. The water arrives as a wall of mud and debris that moves faster than horses can run, giving no time for escape or preparation. Blizzards bury entire settlements under snow so deep that people disappear for days at a time, trapped in their dwellings with whatever food and fuel they had when the storm began. The silence after a blizzard can be complete and terrifying, broken only by the occasional crack of timber settling under the weight of accumulated snow. Prairie fires spread faster than news, consuming everything combustible across thousands of acres in a single day. The smoke appears on the horizon like a brown cloud, and within hours flames race across grassland toward your dwelling with the speed of galloping horses. Your only defense is a fire break cut into the earth around your property, assuming you had time to prepare one and assuming it's wide enough to stop flames that can leap considerable distances. Carbon monoxide from poorly designed heating systems kills families in their sleep, victims of invisible poison that accumulates in enclosed spaces without adequate ventilation. People go to bed healthy and never wake up, found days later by neighbors who wondered why no smoke was coming from their chimney. Chapter 7: Wild Things. The wilderness surrounding your fragile shelter teems with creatures specifically evolved to kill things like you. Predators that view human flesh as just another protein source and human dwellings as convenient hunting grounds where prey gathers predictably and vulnerably. Grizzly bears roam the mountains and river valleys. Massive creatures that stand 9 feet tall on their hind legs and possess the strength to crush a human skull with one swipe of their claws. These bears fear nothing that walks the earth, approaching human settlements with the casual confidence of apex predators investigating potential food sources. Their sense of smell can detect carrion from miles away, and to a grizzly, the difference between dead meat and soon-to-be dead meat is merely a matter of timing. The sound of a grizzly moving through brush is unmistakable, a crashing of vegetation and snapping of branches that announces the approach of something too large and powerful to worry about stealth. When you hear this sound, your options are limited and all of them are bad. Running triggers the bear's chase instincts and guarantees a pursuit you cannot win. Playing dead might work if the bear is merely investigating, but if it's hunting, motionlessness just makes you an easier meal. Mountain lions hunt with the silent efficiency of shadows, stalking their prey for miles before striking with explosive violence that ends before victims realize they're under attack. These cats can leap 40 feet horizontally and drop from overhanging branches onto anything that passes beneath. Their claws are designed for gripping struggling prey, while their teeth find the spine or throat with surgical precision. You never see mountain lions coming because they don't want to be seen until the moment they choose to kill. They follow human travelers for days, learning movement patterns and waiting for the perfect moment to attack. A lion might be watching you right now from a rocky outcrop or tree branch, calculating distance and timing while you remain obliviously unaware of your observer. Wolf packs patrol territories that encompass hundreds of square miles, working in coordinated groups that demonstrate intelligence and planning far beyond most human hunting parties. They communicate through howls that carry for miles, coordinating complex strategies that isolate and exhaust prey before moving in for the kill. A pack can bring down a full-grown horse or buffalo, making solitary humans merely appetizers for creatures that hunt as a profession. Wolves don't just kill for food. They kill to establish dominance and eliminate competition for resources. They view human settlements as invasions of their territory that must be repelled through violence and intimidation. Livestock disappears in the night, taken by hunters that leave only blood trails leading into darkness where no pursuit is possible. Rattlesnakes hide in every shadow, under every rock, and inside every pile of debris where their heat-seeking organs detect the warmth of living flesh. Their camouflage makes them nearly invisible against backgrounds of stone and dried vegetation, and their patience is infinite. A rattlesnake will lie motionless for hours waiting for prey to come within striking distance, then attack with speed that makes reaction impossible. The sound of a rattlesnake's warning is soft and easily missed among the natural sounds of wind and insects, a gentle shaking that could be mistaken for dried leaves or distant rainfall. By the time you hear it clearly enough to recognize the threat, you're already within striking distance of fangs that inject venom designed to break down tissue and stop hearts. Scorpions emerge after dark to hunt in the cooling air, their armor-plated bodies and venomous stingers making them perfect nighttime predators. They hide in boots, clothing, bedding, and anywhere else that offers shelter during daylight hours. Their sting causes excruciating pain followed by paralysis and potentially death, especially in children whose smaller bodies cannot process the toxins. Black widow spiders weave their webs in dark corners where prey blunders in sticky traps that hold struggling victims while venom does its work. The females are particularly aggressive during mating season, and their bite injects neurotoxins that cause muscle spasms, paralysis, and cardiac arrest. They prefer warm, enclosed spaces like outhouses and storage sheds, making every trip to relieve yourself a potential encounter with death. Coyotes hunt in packs during winter months when food becomes scarce, their howling filling the night air with sounds that speak of hunger and desperation. They are intelligent enough to learn human patterns and bold enough to enter settlements in search of food, whether in the form of livestock or people. Children and elderly individuals are particularly vulnerable to coyote attacks, as these predators instinctively target the weakest members of any group. Bison travel in herds that blacken the prairie for miles, each animal weighing over a ton and possessing the temperament of a creature that has never encountered anything capable of threatening it. A startled bison herd can stampede without warning, crushing anything in their path with the unstoppable force of an avalanche made of muscle and horn. The thunder of their hooves can be heard from miles away, but by the time you hear it, escape may already be impossible. Even smaller animals pose significant threats in an environment where medical care is primitive and infections prove fatal. Prairie dogs carry bubonic plague that spreads through flea bites, turning minor encounters with cute rodents into death sentences that unfold over weeks of agony. Skunks carry rabies that transforms normally docile animals into aggressive killers whose bites guarantee slow, horrible death. Wild horses run in herds, led by stallions that will attack anything they perceive as threats to their mares or territory. These animals are far from the domesticated horses of civilization, possessing the strength and aggression of creatures that have survived in harsh wilderness through violence and vigilance. A horse's kick can shatter bones or crush skulls, and their teeth can tear flesh from bone with terrifying efficiency. Snakes of every variety inhabit the grasslands and desert regions, from small coral snakes, whose venom kills through respiratory paralysis, to massive bull snakes that crush prey through muscular constriction. Stepping on a snake while walking through tall grass is an occupational hazard of frontier life, and distinguishing venomous species from harmless ones requires knowledge that most settlers never acquire. At night, the sounds of predators fill the darkness with reminders that humans are not the dominant species in this landscape. Howls, roars, screams, and calls echo across empty spaces where death stalks on four legs and views your presence as both intrusion and opportunity. Chapter 8: Human Predators. The most dangerous creatures in this wasteland walk upright and speak your language. Men who have shed every restraint of civilization and discovered that violence offers quicker rewards than honest labor. These human predators understand that isolated settlements and traveling pioneers carry everything they own, making them perfect targets for those willing to kill for profit. Road agents control the trails between settlements like medieval lords extracting tribute from travelers. Except these lords answer to no king and recognize no law beyond the range of their weapons. They know every water source, every narrow pass, and every place where geography forces travelers into predictable patterns that make ambush inevitable. Captain Morrison leads a gang of former Confederate soldiers who never accepted surrender and turned their military skills toward robbery and murder. They wear pieces of their old uniforms as identification and intimidation, gray cloth faded by sun and stained with blood from victims who resisted or simply annoyed them. Morrison himself carries a cavalry saber across his saddle and uses it to settle disputes with theatrical flourish that leaves bodies carved like holiday roasts. The gang operates from a hideout in Canyon Country where pursuit becomes suicide for anyone foolish enough to attempt it. They know every trail, every water source, and every escape route through terrain that looks identical to outsiders but reveals its secrets only to those who have survived in it long enough to read its subtle signs. Their intelligence network includes bartenders, storekeepers, and stable hands who provide information about valuable cargo, travel schedules, and the defensive capabilities of potential targets. A casual conversation about your destination and cargo might reach Morrison's ears within hours, turning your journey into a carefully planned execution where you serve as both prey and entertainment. When road agents strike, they do so with overwhelming force designed to discourage resistance and ensure quick victory. They appear from concealment, with weapons drawn and demands shouted in voices that brook no argument. Resistance means immediate death. Compliance might mean eventual death. And either way, your possessions become their possessions with no appeal possible. Claim jumpers operate differently, but with equal lethality, targeting isolated prospectors who have struck promising deposits but lack the manpower to defend their discoveries. These thieves study mining claims for weeks, learning work patterns and assessing defensive capabilities before striking with coordinated violence that eliminates witnesses and erases evidence. Black Pete earned his nickname from the soot that perpetually coats his clothing and skin from working around smelters and forges, but the name also reflects the darkness that has consumed whatever humanity he once possessed. He specializes in claim jumping operations that begin with careful observation and end with bodies buried in mine shafts that become permanent graves. His method involves approaching claims under the pretense of seeking work or information, then returning at night with accomplices who eliminate the rightful owners through methods designed to look like accidents. Cave-ins, equipment failures, and falls into mine shafts provide convenient explanations for deaths that investigation would reveal as murders. The isolation that makes mining claims valuable also makes them perfect locations for murder, as screams go unheard and bodies remain undiscovered for weeks or months. By the time anyone investigates, claim jumpers have established possession through forged documents and bribed officials who ask no inconvenient questions. Cattle rustlers operate on a larger scale, stealing entire herds worth thousands of dollars and leaving behind bodies of anyone who attempts to stop them. These organized gangs employ men skilled in horsemanship, marksmanship, and the kind of violence that makes resistance seem futile even when survival depends on fighting back. They alter brands with running irons that transform ownership marks into different symbols, driving stolen cattle to distant markets where no one recognizes the original brands or asks uncomfortable questions about provenance. Rustlers move fast and shoot faster, leaving trails of dead cowboys and empty pastures that tell stories of violence too common to warrant investigation. Professional gamblers drift from town to town like human vultures, feeding on the dreams and desperation of people who mistake them for fellow travelers rather than predators. These men carry marked cards, loaded dice, and concealed weapons that they use to separate victims from money and occasionally from life when accusations of cheating threaten their operations. Gentleman Jack dresses in the finest clothes that money can buy and speaks with the cultured accent of someone educated in Eastern schools. But his hands bear the calluses of weapon use, and his eyes hold the flat stare of someone who has killed without remorse. He operates confidence games that can last for weeks, building trust and relationships that culminate in financial ruin for his victims. His specialty involves convincing prospectors to invest in fictional mining operations that exist only in carefully forged documents and elaborate theatrical performances. Victims hand over life savings for shares in mines that never existed, discovering their mistake only after Jack has disappeared with their money and their hope. Vigilante groups begin with good intentions, but quickly evolve into terrorist organizations that use the pretense of law enforcement to settle personal scores and eliminate anyone they consider undesirable. These men gather in secret meetings where they compile lists of targets and plan operations that they justify as necessary for community safety. Their definition of criminal expands to include anyone who threatens their vision of proper behavior, whether through competition for resources, different religious beliefs, or simply the accident of being born with the wrong skin color or national origin. Vigilante justice becomes mob rule, where accusation equals conviction and conviction equals death. The ritual of vigilante hanging serves as much to terrorize the living as to kill the accused, with ceremonies designed to demonstrate the power of the mob and the futility of resistance. Victims are given opportunities to confess to crimes they may not have committed and to beg for mercy that will not be granted. Cowboys and miners, when liquored up and bored, become walking explosions waiting for any excuse to detonate into violence that destroys everything within reach. These men carry weapons as extensions of their personalities and use them to settle disputes that civilized people would resolve through discussion or legal process. Saloon fights begin over perceived slights, so minor that sober men would laugh at them. But alcohol transforms imagined insults into mortal offenses that demand satisfaction through blood. A spilled drink, a misdirected glance, or a comment about someone's horse can escalate to gunplay that leaves bodies scattered across sawdust floors while survivors argue about who started the trouble. The combination of isolation, desperation, and easy access to weapons creates a culture where violence becomes the default solution to every problem, and where the strong prey upon the weak with impunity. Law enforcement, when it exists at all, focuses on protecting property rather than people, leaving individuals to defend themselves against predators who have made careers out of human suffering. Chapter 9. Trail of Tears. Movement across this hostile landscape transforms the simple act of traveling from one place to another into a deadly gamble, where every mile covered brings new opportunities for the world to kill you in creative and unexpected ways. There are no roads in the civilized sense, just wagon ruts carved by previous travelers and animal trails that might lead to water or might lead to ambush. Your wagon, if you're fortunate enough to own one, consists of wooden planks held together by iron straps and prayers, with wheels that were never designed for the punishment they receive from rocks, ruts, and river crossings. The axles are greased with whatever fat can be spared from cooking, and when they break, which they do with disturbing regularity, you become stranded in territory where help is measured in weeks rather than hours. Loading the wagon requires careful calculation of weight versus necessity, as every pound of supplies must be balanced against the ability of your animals to pull their burden across hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain. Too much weight breaks axles and kills livestock through exhaustion. Too little weight means arriving at your destination without the supplies needed for survival, assuming you arrive at all. River crossings represent some of the most dangerous moments of frontier travel, as swift currents and hidden obstacles turn peaceful-looking streams into death traps that swallow entire families without warning. The water might appear shallow and calm from the bank, but step into the current and discover that appearances deceive when your life depends on accurate assessment. Your wagon wheels sink into mud that grabs like quicksand, holding the vehicle in place while current pushes against the sides with increasing force. The horses panic as water rises around their legs, thrashing and pulling in directions that threaten to overturn the entire outfit. You stand knee-deep in freezing water, trying to guide terrified animals across a riverbed that shifts beneath your feet like liquid stone. When wagons overturn in river crossings, occupants disappear beneath the surface with little chance of rescue. Heavy clothing becomes waterlogged anchors that drag swimmers down, while the current carries them downstream toward rapids or deeper pools where recovery becomes impossible. Bodies surface days later, if they surface at all, battered by rocks and bloated by the gases of decomposition. Horseback travel offers speed and mobility, but creates different dangers that test the limits of human endurance and equine loyalty. Your horse represents not just transportation, but life itself, a living machine that requires constant care and feeding while carrying you across distances that would kill pedestrian travelers. When your horse dies, you die, usually slowly and alone in places where vultures gather with patient optimism. The relationship between rider and mount becomes intimate through shared suffering, as both struggle against heat, cold, thirst, and exhaustion while crossing terrain that offers no mercy to either species. Horses step in prairie dog holes and snap their legs like twigs, throwing riders who break necks or skulls on impact with ground hard as concrete. Lame horses must be shot to prevent suffering, leaving their riders stranded with whatever supplies they can carry on foot. Horse thieves know that stealing a man's mount is equivalent to murder, so they practice their trade with the casual efficiency of professional killers who understand that loose ends lead to hanging. They strike at night, cutting picket ropes and leading animals away into darkness where pursuit becomes impossible until morning light reveals empty spaces where horses once stood. Stagecoaches offer the luxury of shared misery, crowded compartments where passengers endure together the violence of badly maintained roads and the constant threat of robbery or accident. The coaches themselves are wooden boxes mounted on leather springs that provide minimal cushioning against impacts that rattle teeth and compress spines with each bump and pothole. Stage drivers are often drunk by necessity rather than choice, using alcohol to numb the pain of bruised kidneys and aching backs, while maintaining the reflexes needed to control 6 horses pulling a heavy load at dangerous speeds across unpredictable terrain. Their lives depend on intimate knowledge of every rock, rut, and river crossing along routes that stretch for hundreds of miles through territory where mistakes mean death. Bandits know stage schedules and routes, positioning themselves at natural choke points where geography forces vehicles into predictable patterns that make escape impossible. The cry of "stand and deliver" echoes across canyons and valleys with the authority of men who have made killing their profession and consider passenger coaches merely mobile treasure chests defended by drivers who value their own lives more than their cargo. Walking represents the transportation method of last resort, available to anyone with functioning legs, but practical only for those willing to accept odds that favor death over arrival. The distances between settlements can exceed 100 miles across terrain that offers no shade, no water, and no shelter from weather that kills through exposure, dehydration, and hypothermia. Pedestrian travelers become targets for every predator, human and animal, that recognizes vulnerability and opportunity. You carry everything you own on your back, moving slowly enough for pursuit and lacking the speed needed for escape when threats materialize. Your footprints tell stories to anyone who can read sign, revealing your direction, your pace, and your growing desperation as supplies run low. Weather transforms every journey into a battle against forces that dwarf human endurance and mock human preparation. Blizzards bury travelers alive, creating white voids where direction becomes meaningless and survival depends on finding shelter that may not exist. Flash floods sweep across dry creek beds with walls of water that move faster than horses can run, giving no warning and accepting no appeals for mercy. Desert heat kills through dehydration that begins the moment you start sweating and accelerates until your body shuts down like a machine running without oil. The sun burns exposed skin while reflected heat from rocks and sand creates ovens that cook travelers slowly and thoroughly. Mirages mock thirsty travelers with visions of water that disappear when approached, leading them further from real sources of relief. Navigation relies on landmarks that look identical to inexperienced eyes, creating vast, empty spaces where travelers circle until supplies run out and buzzards begin their patient circling overhead. The North Star provides direction for those who can find it, but clouds, storms, and simple exhaustion can obscure celestial guidance when it's needed most. Mechanical failures strand travelers in hostile territory where repair materials don't exist and help won't come. Broken wheels, snapped axles, torn harnesses, and injured animals create emergencies that demand immediate solutions using whatever materials can be improvised from surroundings that offer little in the way of mechanical resources. The isolation of frontier travel means that accidents become death sentences, as broken bones, torn flesh, and internal injuries receive no treatment beyond whatever first aid can be improvised by people who learn medicine from necessity rather than training. A simple fall from a horse becomes a fatal injury when infection sets in and gangrene spreads through tissue that can't heal properly without medical intervention. Chapter 10. Liquid Courage. Alcohol flows through frontier life like blood through veins, serving as medicine, currency, courage, and slow poison all at once. In a world where every day brings fresh opportunities for violent death, liquor provides the only reliable escape from realities too harsh for sober minds to endure without breaking. The whiskey served in frontier saloons bears little resemblance to the refined spirits of civilization, consisting instead of grain alcohol mixed with tobacco juice, gunpowder, and whatever else gives it color and bite. Bartenders call it coffin varnish, with the dark humor of men who sell death by the glass to customers who buy it willingly. Each shot burns like liquid fire going down, stripping the lining from throats already raw from dust and shouting. The alcohol hits empty stomachs with the impact of a physical blow, spreading warmth through bodies that haven't felt comfortable in months. Regular drinkers develop hollow cheeks and yellow eyes that speak of livers slowly dissolving under the constant assault of industrial-strength intoxication. Laudanum bottles line the shelves of general stores like miniature sentinels of chemical escape, each one containing liquid opium marketed as medicine for everything from toothaches to heartbreak. The sweet, cloying taste masks the bitterness that follows addiction, as users discover that pain relief comes with interest rates that compound daily until the cure becomes worse than any disease. Mrs. Patterson started taking laudanum for the headaches that began after her husband died in a mining accident, measuring careful doses that provided blessed relief from grief too large for human hearts to contain. Within weeks, the doses grew larger and more frequent as her body learned to crave the artificial peace that only opium could provide. Now she sits in the corner of her cabin, rocking in a chair that creaks with the rhythm of her addiction, staring at walls that exist somewhere beyond the chemical fog that has become her permanent residence. Her children fend for themselves while their mother floats in pharmaceutical limbo, present in body but absent in every way that matters. Beer exists when hops and barley can be obtained, but without refrigeration it sours quickly in the heat. Developing flavors that suggest fermentation has continued well past the point of palatability. Warm, flat beer tastes like liquid bread that has gone bad. But alcohol is alcohol, and desperate people develop tolerance for beverages that would make civilized palates revolt. The brewing process itself becomes a gamble with contamination, as bacteria compete with yeast for control of the fermentation process. When harmful microorganisms win, the resulting beverage causes dysentery that can kill through dehydration and fluid loss. Brewers taste their products with the caution of people who understand that bad beer can be literally deadly. Saloons serve as social centers where men gather to drink away the memories of violence, failure, and isolation that define frontier existence. The establishments themselves are crude affairs, wooden buildings with sawdust floors that absorb spilled liquor and blood with equal efficiency. The smell of stale alcohol mingles with tobacco smoke and unwashed bodies to create an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. Bartenders keep shotguns within easy reach, knowing that alcohol amplifies every emotion and transforms minor disagreements into deadly confrontations. They serve drinks with a weary resignation of men who have seen too many customers die over spilled whiskey and imagined slights. The most successful saloon keepers are those who can read the mood of their clientele and intervene before violence destroys both property and paying customers. Drinking games provide entertainment for men with few other recreational options. But these contests often escalate into competitions where pride becomes more important than survival. Players match each other shot for shot until consciousness becomes negotiable and death becomes a possible side effect of entertainment. The winner of a drinking contest might achieve temporary status and respect, but victory often comes at the cost of alcohol poisoning that kills slowly and painfully over the following days. Survivors develop reputations that attract challenges from other drinkers seeking to prove their own tolerance for self-destruction. Women who drink in public face social consequences that extend beyond simple disapproval, as frontier society reserves its harshest judgment for females who violate the narrow behavioral expectations that define respectability. Female drinkers become targets for violence and exploitation, their vulnerability increased by substances that impair judgment and reduce physical resistance. The saloon girls who serve drinks and provide companionship walk a dangerous line between survival and destruction, using alcohol to numb the emotional pain of their circumstances while serving customers whose inhibitions dissolve in proportion to their consumption. These women often die young from violence, disease, or the cumulative effects of chemicals that promise escape but deliver only deeper captivity. Medical alcohol serves multiple purposes in a world where antiseptics are rare and anesthesia is non-existent. Doctors use whiskey to clean wounds, sterilize instruments, and provide pain relief during surgical procedures that would be unbearable without chemical assistance. Patients drink themselves into unconsciousness before operations, hoping to remain insensible until the cutting stops. The line between medicinal use and addiction blurs quickly when alcohol becomes the primary treatment for chronic pain, emotional trauma, and the daily stress of surviving in hostile environments. People begin drinking for legitimate medical reasons and continue drinking long after the original conditions have healed or killed them. Prohibition efforts by religious groups and temperance societies founder against the reality that alcohol serves essential functions in frontier life beyond simple recreation. When legal sources disappear, illegal distillation fills the void with products even more dangerous than the commercial varieties, as amateur distillers produce liquor contaminated with methanol and other toxic byproducts. The economic importance of alcohol cannot be understated in communities where liquid currency often proves more valuable than metal coins. Whiskey serves as payment for services, barter for goods, and reward for labor in places where traditional money is scarce and credit is non-existent. Winter drinking increases dramatically as isolation and depression combine with cold temperatures to create perfect conditions for alcoholism that kills slowly through liver damage and quickly through accidents caused by impaired judgment. People drink to stay warm, to forget their circumstances, and to pass time until spring returns with its promise of renewed hope. The social costs of frontier drinking extend beyond individual destruction to include domestic violence, child neglect, and community breakdown as alcohol dissolves the bonds that hold fragile settlements together. Wives suffer beatings from husbands whose anger is amplified by whiskey. Children starve while parents spend food money on liquor that provides temporary escape from responsibilities too heavy to bear sober. Chapter 11. Boom and Bust. Gold fever strikes the human mind like a virulent disease, transforming rational people into frenzied prospectors who abandon everything they know in pursuit of wealth that exists mainly in their fevered imaginations. The reality of mining bears no resemblance to the dreams that draw thousands of desperate souls into this mechanical hell carved from solid rock and human ambition. Your day begins before dawn in darkness that matches the blackness of the mine shafts, where you'll spend the next 12 hours breathing dust and praying that today isn't the day the mountain decides to reclaim the spaces you've carved from its heart. The air at this elevation cuts like knives made of ice, and your breath forms clouds that disappear into the larger cloud of misery that hovers over every mining camp like a permanent shroud. Placer mining requires you to stand knee-deep in streams where the water temperature hovers just above freezing while you pan for flakes of gold smaller than fingernail clippings. Your hands turn white, then blue, then stop responding to commands from a brain that has lost the ability to process the constant pain of hypothermia. The water numbs your legs until you can't feel them, but you continue working because stopping means admitting defeat and returning to whatever desperate circumstances drove you to this frozen purgatory. The gold pan itself is a shallow dish that must be swirled with precise motions that take months to master and years to perfect. Too fast, and you wash away the precious metal you're seeking. Too slow, and you accomplish nothing while your body temperature drops toward levels that make consciousness optional. Most prospectors never find enough gold to pay for their equipment, much less make them wealthy. Hard rock mining transforms men into human moles, crawling through tunnels barely wide enough for their bodies while wielding pickaxes in spaces where a full swing is impossible. The mountain presses down with weight that can be felt in every breath, reminding miners that they exist only at the sufferance of geological forces that could crush them like insects without changing the rhythm of their own breathing. Cave-ins occur without warning and with finality that makes escape impossible for anyone caught in the wrong place when tons of rock decide to obey gravity. The sound begins as a distant groan that might be mistaken for wind, then escalates to a roar that drowns out screams before ending in silence that speaks of spaces filled with stone where living men once stood. Rescue attempts often kill more people than the original collapse, as desperate diggers ignore safety protocols in their haste to reach trapped miners who may already be dead. The mountain doesn't distinguish between victims and rescuers, crushing both with equal indifference, while families gather at tunnel mouths to wait for news that rarely brings comfort. Mercury poisoning creeps through mining camps like a silver-tongued devil, promising easy separation of gold from, or while slowly destroying the minds and bodies of men who handle quicksilver with bare hands and breathe its vapors in poorly ventilated spaces. The symptoms begin subtly with tremors that could be attributed to cold or fear, then progress to personality changes that transform gentle men into violent strangers. Mad Hatters aren't just characters in children's stories, but real people whose brains have been cooked by mercury exposure until they can no longer distinguish between reality and hallucination. They wander through mining camps talking to people who aren't there, laughing at jokes nobody told, and attacking friends they no longer recognize as human beings. Mining camps are temporary settlements that spring up around promising deposits like mushrooms after rain, growing from empty valleys into crowded hellholes within weeks as word spreads that gold has been found. These communities exist in a constant state of barely controlled chaos, where law is whatever the strongest men decide it is, and order is maintained through fear and violence. The buildings are constructed from whatever materials can be scavenged or stolen, creating ramshackle structures that lean against each other for support, while threatening to collapse at the first strong wind. Streets are muddy tracks that flood when it rains and turn to dust when it doesn't, carrying the mingled smells of human waste, rotting food, and industrial chemicals that define the olfactory landscape of frontier mining. Claim disputes escalate to violence with predictable regularity as men who have invested everything in narrow strips of potentially valuable ground defend their stakes with weapons and determination born of desperation. Survey markers disappear in the night. Boundary lines shift mysteriously, and promising claims get jumped by armed groups who understand that possession enforced by violence trumps legal ownership supported by paper. Claim jumping itself, has evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise where gangs of professional thieves study mining operations for weeks before striking with coordinated attacks designed to eliminate witnesses and establish ownership through forged documents and bribed officials. The isolation that makes mining claims valuable also makes them perfect locations for murder, as screams go unheard and bodies remain undiscovered until the smell becomes too obvious to ignore. Equipment represents both salvation and bankruptcy for prospectors who must choose between inferior tools that break when needed most and quality instruments that cost more than most men earn in years of dangerous labor. Pickaxes snap at critical moments, leaving miners with shortened handles and reduced leverage. Shovels bend under loads they were never designed to bear. Sluice boxes wash away in flash floods that arrive without warning and disappear with equal suddenness. The economics of mining are stacked against individual prospectors like a card game where the house controls the deck and writes the rules. Equipment dealers charge whatever the market will bear, knowing that desperate men will pay any price for tools they need to pursue dreams that probably won't come true. Supply wagons arrive sporadically and leave with profits that would shame honest thieves. Winter mining transforms an already difficult profession into something approaching suicide, as temperatures drop low enough to freeze mercury solid and streams turn to ice that must be chopped away before panning can begin. Miners work with hands so cold they can't feel whether they're holding tools or gold, while frostbite nibbles at fingers and toes like a patient predator that knows its dinner can't escape. Underground fires burn in mine shafts where oxygen feeds coal seams and timber supports, creating infernos that can smolder for years while poisoning the air with gases that kill silently and efficiently. Miners emerge from shifts with blackened lungs and shortened lifespans, trading their health for wages that barely cover the cost of continued existence. The boom and bust cycle that defines mining communities ensures that today's thriving camp becomes tomorrow's ghost town when the ore runs out or proves less valuable than expected. Fortunes disappear as quickly as they're made, leaving behind empty buildings and abandoned dreams that serve as monuments to human greed and geological indifference. Chapter 12: Frontier Women. Women on the frontier face every danger that threatens men, plus additional perils that arise simply for being female in a world where gender means vulnerability and protection comes only from whatever weapons they can carry and whatever allies they can trust with their lives. The journey west transforms women from protected members of civilized society into armed survivors who must be prepared to kill in defense of themselves and their children. The wagon trains and settlements that promise safety often deliver the opposite, concentrating women in locations where their scarcity makes them targets for violence that civilized law once prevented. Childbirth in the wilderness becomes a gamble with death where the stakes include both mother and child, played out in one-room cabins with assistance from whatever women happen to be available regardless of their experience or knowledge. Midwives learn their craft through trial and error, with error often measured in lives lost to complications that proper medical care could prevent. Sarah Murphy gives birth to her fourth child on a dirt floor while her husband holds her hands and her other children huddle in the corner, listening to sounds that speak of pain beyond their understanding. The midwife, a neighbor who learned her skills by watching other births, works by candlelight with hands that shake from exhaustion and fear. When complications arise, there are no doctors to call and no hospitals to reach, just desperate improvisation and prayers that rarely receive the answers that desperation demands. The baby arrives silent and blue, another small tragedy in a landscape already littered with graves too small for adult sorrow. Sarah hemorrhages for hours afterward, her life seeping away through wounds that heal or don't heal based on luck rather than medical intervention. She survives this birth, but knows that the next one might be her last. making every pregnancy a potential death sentence that she must accept because frontier life offers few alternatives to biological destiny. Domestic violence flourishes in isolated communities where privacy becomes a weapon that abusers wield against victims who have nowhere to run and no one to turn to for protection. A woman's nearest neighbor might be miles away, too far to hear screams and too distant to provide meaningful assistance when violence erupts in homes where alcohol and stress combine with masculine authority to create perfect storms of brutality. The law, such as it exists, considers women property rather than people, making domestic disputes private matters that don't warrant outside intervention unless bodies start accumulating in ways that threaten public order. A woman beaten by her husband has no legal recourse and little social support, especially if the beating doesn't result in permanent injury that provides visible evidence of abuse. Martha Jenkins endures nightly beatings from a husband whose drinking transforms him into something barely human, a creature that speaks with her husband's voice, but acts with the casual cruelty of someone who views her as property that exists for his convenience. Her children witness these attacks with a horrified fascination of observers at public executions, learning lessons about power and helplessness that will shape their own relationships in years to come. When Martha finally shoots her husband during one of his rages, the community splits between those who believe she defended herself and those who consider her a murderer who violated the natural order that places women under masculine authority. The trial, such as it is, takes place in the same saloon where her husband spent his evenings drinking away the money needed for food and clothing, presided over by men who must decide whether a woman has the right to kill in self-defense. Economic opportunities for women are limited to occupations that exploit their gender while providing barely enough income for survival. Prostitution offers the highest wages available to women, but carries risks that include disease, violence, and social ostracism that follow survivors for the rest of their shortened lives. Brothels operate openly in most frontier towns, providing services that men demand and society tolerates while condemning the women who provide them. The girls who work in these establishments are often refugees from domestic violence, economic desperation, or family situations that offer no better alternatives. They serve customers who view them as commodities rather than people, dispensing physical intimacy without emotional connection to men who pay for services they can't obtain through relationships. Disease spreads through these communities like fire through dry grass, as syphilis and gonorrhea pass from customer to customer through women who have no protection against infections that slowly destroy their bodies. Many prostitutes die young from disease, violence, or suicide, their brief lives serving as cautionary tales that society ignores while continuing to demand the services that kill them. Teaching offers respectable employment for educated women, but school marms face challenges that extend far beyond classroom management. Communities expect teachers to serve as moral exemplars while paying salaries that barely cover basic survival needs. Students range from eager children to sullen teenagers who attend school sporadically when farm or mining work doesn't require their labor. Miss Elizabeth Hartford arrives in a mining camp with dreams of educating frontier children and discovers that her one-room schoolhouse doubles as a community meeting hall, church, and occasional courtroom where disputes are settled through methods that would horrify civilized educators. Her students carry weapons to class and discuss violence with the casual expertise of people who have grown up surrounded by death. The school building itself is a testament to community priorities, constructed from leftover lumber and furnished with whatever supplies can be begged, borrowed, or stolen from other uses. Textbooks are rare and often outdated, forcing teachers to improvise curricula from whatever printed materials they can obtain. Paper is precious, pencils are treasured, and education often takes second place to survival when resources must be allocated between learning and living. Marriage on the frontier is often more about survival than love, as women seek protection and economic security while men seek domestic labor and companionship. Courtship is brief when it exists at all, compressed by circumstances that make emotional compatibility a luxury that few can afford when physical survival demands immediate practical arrangements. Mail-order brides travel hundreds of miles to marry men they've never met, carrying letters that promise more than reality can deliver and hopes that often die within days of arrival. These women discover that frontier husbands bear little resemblance to the men who wrote courteous letters from distant territories, and that marriage contracts offer no protection against disappointment or abuse. Pioneer women develop skills that would be considered masculine in civilized society, learning to shoot accurately, handle livestock, and defend homesteads against raiders while their husbands are away on business that might keep them gone for weeks. These women become partners in survival rather than dependents seeking protection, earning respect through competence rather than compliance. They raise children who learn to work before they learn to play, teaching survival skills that begin with weapon handling and proceed through the practical knowledge needed for frontier existence. These mothers prepare their daughters for lives that will probably be harder than their own, while hoping that civilization will arrive in time to offer better alternatives than the harsh realities that currently define female existence on the frontier. Chapter 13: Native Resistance. The land beneath your feet belongs to people who have called this place home for generations, and they're willing to kill to keep what was never yours to take. The Indian Wars aren't romantic cavalry charges, but desperate conflicts between peoples fighting for survival in a landscape that can't support both civilizations. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche warriors you might encounter know every creek, every hill, every hiding place across thousands of square miles. They move across the landscape like shadows, appearing where you least expect them and disappearing before you can organize pursuit. Your crude maps are nothing compared to the intimate knowledge they carry in their blood. Chief Red Cloud commands warriors who understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite terror. His tactical brilliance has humiliated trained cavalry officers and destroyed supply columns that thought superior weapons guaranteed victory over primitive opponents. The raids begin at dawn when mist clings to the grass, materializing from empty landscape as painted warriors emerge with war cries that speak of anger refined into art. They strike with coordinated precision that makes military manuals seem like children's games, taking what they need and destroying what they can't carry. Your rifle might fire faster than their bows, but their arrows fly silently while your gunshots announce your position to every hostile within miles. Superior technology means nothing when used by inferior tacticians against opponents who treat warfare as both profession and religion. Scalping is practiced by both sides, as territorial governments pay bounties for Indian scalps while tribes collect trophies from enemies. The process is swift and efficient, requiring skill that speaks to cultural practices refined through generations of warfare. Warriors carry curved blades that separate skin from bone with surgical precision. Fort protection exists mainly in settlers' imaginations. Small garrisons of poorly trained soldiers can't defend vast territories against enemies who know every approach. These wooden stockades might deter casual raiders, but determined war parties wait for opportunities when patrols are absent and defenses weakened. Siege warfare transforms settlers into prisoners within their own homes, trapped by surrounding warriors who demonstrate infinite patience while supplies dwindle. Days pass without visible enemies, but smoke signals remind besieged families that death waits just beyond rifle range. Captivity usually means torture designed to test courage and provide entertainment for warriors whose losses have created appetites for revenge. Some captives are adopted into tribes, particularly women and children who can be integrated into family structures. Many choose adaptation over extinction. Peace negotiations fail because neither side can deliver what the other demands. Settlers want Indians removed so development can proceed. Tribes want traditional lands restored and buffalo herds protected from hunters who kill for hides while leaving meat to rot. The cycle of violence escalates as each atrocity demands revenge, spiraling outward until entire regions become uninhabitable. The buffalo herds that sustain plains tribes disappear under systematic slaughter, destroying food sources more effectively than military campaigns. Chapter 14: Sin City. Frontier towns aren't communities, but collections of desperate souls thrown together by necessity, held together by fear and greed. These settlements exist where commerce meets chaos, where money changes hands faster than bullets, and both flow with equal frequency. Main Street stretches like an open wound through town, a muddy strip lined with businesses catering to humanity's baser instincts. Buildings lean against each other for support, constructed from green lumber that warps as it dries, creating structures that appear drunk even when their occupants are sober. The Silver Dollar Saloon dominates commercial activity like a wooden cathedral dedicated to alcohol and chance, its bat-winged doors swinging constantly as customers stagger in seeking liquid salvation. The establishment never closes because there's always someone drunk enough to spend money and someone sober enough to take it. Inside, air hangs thick with tobacco smoke, whiskey fumes, and accumulated sweat of men who bathe monthly whether they need it or not. Spittoons overflow with brown contributions, creating pools that mix with spilled drinks and blood from nightly entertainment that stains sawdust floors. Professional gamblers work the room like sharks, identifying marks through observations that separate tourists from locals. Their fingers move across marked cards with practiced precision, while scanning for tells that reveal when opponents are bluffing or about to draw weapons instead of cards. Poker games begin civilly but deteriorate as alcohol dissolves inhibitions and bad luck transforms into personal insults demanding satisfaction through violence. Accusations of cheating arise predictably, leading to confrontations that clear saloons and sometimes burn entire blocks when overturned lamps meet alcohol seasoned wood. Brothels operate openly along back streets, providing services that married men seek, while society pretends these businesses don't exist. The women are refugees from domestic violence or economic desperation, selling themselves to survive in places where alternatives are worse than prostitution. Madame Chun runs the most successful establishment, a Chinese woman who discovered entrepreneurship offered better opportunities than matrimony. She manages her girls with military efficiency and understanding compassion, but violence still erupts when alcohol meets testosterone in dangerous proportions. General stores charge whatever the market will bear, knowing competition is non-existent and alternatives are hundreds of miles away. Store owners become wealthy through practiced exploitation of people who have no choice but to pay inflated prices for survival necessities. Fire represents the greatest threat to settlements built entirely of wood and heated by open flames. Entire towns burn regularly as overturned lamps and carelessly discarded cigars reduce months of construction to ash within hours. Volunteer fire brigades accomplish little beyond preventing spread to adjacent settlements. Boot Hill grows steadily as violence, disease, and accident claim residents faster than births can replace them. Wooden markers rot away within years, leaving anonymous graves as monuments to people whose names were forgotten before their bodies finished decomposing. Justice arrives monthly with Judge Parker, dispensing legal decisions in the saloon's back room. Trials last minutes as verdicts are reached through democratic processes favoring popular opinion over legal precedent. Punishment is swift and public, designed to entertain spectators and deter potential criminals. Chapter 15. The Reaper Rides. Death strikes without warning in this wasteland, claiming lives with casual efficiency that recognizes no distinction between prepared and unprepared, deserving and undeserving of continued existence. Gunshot wounds transform bodies into crime scenes where blood tells stories investigators rarely live to read. A chest bullet creates entrance wounds the size of coins and exit wounds the size of plates. Lead balls flatten and tumble inside flesh, tearing through organs with explosive force that turns vital functions into abstract concepts. Dr. Matthews probes bullet wounds with carpentry instruments when sober enough to practice, searching for metal fragments in bodies bleeding faster than bandages can absorb. His success depends more on luck than skill, as patients survive gunshots despite medical intervention rather than because of it. Infection follows trauma, like vultures follow wounded animals, turning minor injuries into death sentences unfolding over weeks of increasing agony. Gangrene begins as slight discoloration around wound edges, spreading through tissue that turns black and releases odors, making breathing an endurance exercise. Disease stalks settlements with predator persistence, claiming victims whose only crime was breathing infected air. Cholera transforms healthy adults into dehydrated corpses within hours, as violent diarrhea strips bodies of every fluid drop. Typhoid fever cooks victims from inside with sustained temperatures that boil brains until delirium becomes preferable to consciousness. Accidents happen with natural phenomenon frequency, where dangerous work meets primitive safety equipment. Mine shafts collapse onto workers trusting timber supports cut by men who learned engineering through trial and error. Sawmill blades catch limbs, severing them with mechanical precision while victims bleed to death on floors designed for wood chips. Suicide rates climb with seasonal regularity as isolation, failure, and pain combine to create lives feeling worse than death. Men walk into wilderness and disappear, choosing exposure over continued existence where hope dies faster than bodies. Their bones bleach under sun, witnessing countless tragedies without offering comment. Burial becomes a race against decomposition in climates where bodies spoil faster than graves can be dug. Ground is often too hard for shovels or too soft for permanent graves, forcing choices between shallow resting places, inviting scavenging, and deep excavations requiring labor they can't spare. Coffins are luxuries few can afford, as lumber for housing takes priority over containers for the dead. Bodies are wrapped in whatever cloth can be spared, often blankets survivors need for protection against elements killing the living as efficiently as they preserve the dead. Boot Hill cemeteries fill quickly with wooden markers rotting faster than memories, leaving anonymous graves as mortality reminders without preserving individual identity. Children die with heartbreaking frequency from diseases civilization has learned to prevent, their small bodies lacking strength to fight infections adults might survive. The psychological impact of constant death creates communities of traumatized survivors, learning not to form deep attachments to people who might disappear at any moment. Winter deaths multiply as cold combines with inadequate shelter and limited food, creating perfect mortality conditions arriving slowly rather than suddenly. Spring thaw reveals bodies winter preserved in natural refrigeration, creating cleanup projects reminding survivors how many neighbors didn't survive cold months. These discoveries become routine as communities accept death as natural consequence of choosing to live in places never meant for human habitation. Chapter 16. Why You Wouldn't Survive. 24 hours have passed since you opened your eyes in this wilderness, and surviving this long deserves recognition for achieving what most couldn't accomplish with modern equipment and medical knowledge. But single-day survival doesn't guarantee a second day, much less the months required to establish sustainable existence in an environment designed to kill humans efficiently. Your modern body, accustomed to climate control and processed food, would begin failing within hours of frontier exposure. The water alone would introduce bacteria your immune system has never encountered, creating digestive chaos, leaving you dehydrated while more serious threats gathered around your vulnerable form. Physical labor would destroy your soft hands and comfortable spine within days, creating wounds that infection would claim as bacterial territory that has never faced antibiotics. Every cut would become a potential death sentence where proper wound care consists of whiskey and prayer applied in whatever proportions seem appropriate. The violence permeating frontier life would eventually claim you through random chance, as arguments over trivial matters escalate, to gunplay settling disputes through methods leaving no room for appeal. Your civilized instincts toward negotiation would mark you as weakness in a culture respecting only strength and weapon speed. Sleep would become a luxury you couldn't afford where predators hunt at night and human enemies prefer darkness for operations. Chronic exhaustion would dull reflexes and cloud judgment at moments when clarity might mean the difference between existence and becoming scavenger food. Psychological pressure of constant danger would break your modern mind before physical threats claimed your body. Anxiety and depression, treatable in civilized society, become death sentences where mental weakness attracts predators. Isolation would drive you to behaviors survival requires, but sanity cannot endure. Weather would assault you with extremes modern climate control has made unimaginable, temperatures killing through exposure while you sleep in shelters, providing barely more protection than outdoors. Disease would claim you through vectors modern sanitation has eliminated, bacteria thriving where human waste mixes with drinking water. But people did survive this nightmare and prospered despite odds guaranteeing failure. They weren't superhuman, just ordinary individuals adapting to extraordinary circumstances through necessity and determination that modern comfort has made unnecessary. They developed forgotten skills, learning to read weather signs, track animals, and navigate by stars while carrying weapons they weren't afraid to use. These survivors created communities from nothing, establishing institutions serving as foundations for modern Western states. They built schools and governments from raw materials and determination while fighting daily battles against forces wanting them dead. The frontier experience forged people believing they could overcome any obstacle through work and will, creating cultural attitudes persisting today. Understanding the real frontier helps us appreciate how far we've progressed and what we've lost in the journey from survival to comfort. You wouldn't last a day in the Wild West, and that's probably fortunate. But those who lasted long enough to build something permanent deserve recognition for achievements modern comfort makes difficult to understand. Their legacy lives in attitudes and institutions they created, reminding us that humans can survive almost anything when survival becomes the only alternative to death.